Have you ever believed something just because, everyone says so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all do it.
Right. Like it's just human nature to absorb what's around us. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what if doing that isn't just like a bad habit?
Right. What if it's actually a violation of a fundamental law?
Exactly. Because today we are looking at a really profound lecture by the Islamic scholar Guardianship. This is lecture 7 of 17 from his Tului Islam series.
Yeah, and in this one, he is breaking down what he calls the intellectual defense system.
The intellectual defense system. I love that phrasing. Sounds like a sci-fi shield or something.
It kind of is. But for your mind, he's pulling this entire framework from Surah Al-Isra, that's chapter 17 of the Quran, specifically verses 34 through 38.
And the goal for this deep dive is to unpack how these verses basically build this comprehensive framework for systemic integrity.
Right. Rejecting blind following, securing your own maturity, and really protecting society as a whole.
It is shockingly relevant to our modern age, especially with, all the information overload we deal with today.
Oh, totally.
But to build a defense system, we first have to understand the attack, right?
Exactly. You have to know what you're defending against.
Well, how are our minds being compromised daily by all this external noise? Like, what is the actual mechanism of the attack here?
Well, Parwez starts his diagnosis with Ayat 36. And this verse lays down a really strict command for believers.
Okay, what does it say?
It explicitly commands you not to pursue that of which you have no knowledge.
So no blind guessing.
Right, no blind guessing. But it goes further. It says that your hearing, your sight, and your intellect, the Arabic word used here is fuad, will all be questioned.
Okay, I want to pause on that word, fuad, because normally you see that translated as heart, right?
Yeah, usually heart or sometimes just mind.
But Parwez takes a totally different angle on this. He goes really deep into the linguistics.
He really does, because Arabic has multiple words for these concepts. You have qalb, which is the typical word for heart. It implies something that turns or fluctuates.
Like emotions.
Exactly. Emotions shift. But fu'ad comes from a root word that is associated with roasting or burning.
Wait, burning, like actual fire.
Yeah. It implies this intense, active, almost combustible process of refining something.
Oh, wow. That is a completely different vibe than a gentle beating heart.
Right. Parwez argues that the fiat is your critical reasoning. It's the intellect acting as a firewall.
A firewall. Okay, I like that.
The eyes and the ears, they're just passive sensors. They just take in light and sound. But the fuad, that burning filter, has to process it.
So if I'm understanding this, it's not enough to just hear something or see something. The intellect has to actively burn away the nonsense.
Exactly. If you accept a piece of information just because you saw it, without running it through the fuad, you are violating this law.
Okay, let's unpack this with a modern example.
Yeah.
Because it's like mindlessly retweeting a sensational headline, right?
Oh, that's the perfect analogy.
You see a tweet, it makes you mad, you hit retweet, your eyes saw it, your fingers worked. But the fuad was completely turned off. You didn't check the source. You didn't read the article.
You just reacted. And Parwez connects this bypass of the intellect directly to modern propaganda and advertising.
Really? He was writing about advertising.
Yeah. I mean, think about the billions of dollars spent to market harmful products. He specifically brings up things like cigarettes or, dangerous medicines.
Right, because you can't logically sell someone lung cancer.
Exactly. If they engaged your fuad, you would never buy it. So what do the advertisers do?
They manipulate your psychological weaknesses.
Yep. They associate the product with status or beauty or relaxation. They overwhelm the eyes and the ears to completely bypass the intellect.
That is so insidious, but it works.
It does. And Parwez actually frames this using a much older, more conceptual narrative from the text.
Okay, what narrative?
He brings up Satan's original challenge to God.
Oh, interesting. How does that fit into advertising?
Well, according to the text, Satan's ultimate threat wasn't about physical violence, it was psychological. He claimed he would control humans via voices.
Voices. So media.
Media. He would assault them from the front, back, left, and right. It's a total media saturation designed to hijack the mind.
So this ancient text is perfectly diagnosing our modern mass media manipulation. That is mind-blowing.
It really is. The goal is to get you to act without thinking. And Ayat 36 says, you will be questioned about this. You are held accountable for turning off your filter.
You can't just blame the algorithm. You can't say, well, the TV told me to.
No, the responsibility is entirely on you. Think about how much anxiety and just societal conflict in general is born from this.
Oh, it's everywhere. We live in a post-truth world because people refuse to use their fuad.
Exactly. Relying on the fuad is our intellectual defense system. It's step one.
Okay, so that's the individual defense, guarding your own mind. But a society is made up of individuals.
Right.
And inevitably, some of those individuals are going to be vulnerable. So how does this text protect the defenseless parts of a community?
That brings us to the next stage in Parwez's analysis. We move into Ayat 34, which discusses the command regarding the orphan's property, or in Arabic, mal al-yatim.
Okay, the orphan's property. And I have to say, when I was reading through the source material for this, I was pretty skeptical about where he takes this concept.
I don't blame you. The literal translation is very straightforward. It just means, don't steal a parentless child's inheritance.
Right. It's a basic moral rule. Don't be a terrible guardian. But Parwez extrapolates this way beyond the literal child, doesn't he?
He does a massive linguistic deep dive here. He points out that the word orphan yatim linguistically means anyone who is left alone.
Okay.
Anyone who is vulnerable, marginalized, or lacking a support system in society. Widows, the poor, the disenfranchised.
I follow him there. That makes sense. But then he makes this huge jump to the macro level.
The national level.
Yeah. He claims that the vulnerable assets of a nation like public funds, their national treasury, are structurally the equivalent of the orphan's property.
Yeah, it sounds radical, right?
It sounds like he's projecting a modern political theory backward onto an ancient text. How does he justify calling tax dollars an orphan's inheritance?
It comes back to the structural reality of vulnerability. The treasury belongs to the public, right?
Right, technically.
But the public cannot physically guard the vault. The entire population can't stand outside the bank. Therefore, the public's wealth is structurally vulnerable.
Ah, okay, I see.
So the state has a fundamental responsibility to act as a guardian. The politicians don't own the money, they are just temporary custodians.
So under this framework, political corruption or embezzlement isn't just a regular crime.
No, it is the exact moral equivalent of stealing bread from a vulnerable orphan.
Wow. Treating a nation's resources like orphan property completely changes the standard of political accountability.
It totally raises the stakes. And remember, the guardian has a very specific timeline. They must protect the asset until the orphan or the society reaches full maturity.
Right, and the Arabic word for that maturity used in the verse is ashuda.
Exactly. Ashuda.
And this specific word, caused an absolute explosion in British India in the 1920s.
Oh, the history here is fascinating and incredibly intense.
Listeners, you have to picture this. We were in the late 1920s, British colonial India. A Hindu legislator introduces something called the Sarda Bill.
Right, Harbila Sarda.
And the goal of this bill was to ban child marriage, to set a minimum legal age of consent, which to us today is just, well, it's a basic human right.
It's a no-brainer for us, but back then, it was seen as a massive overreach.
The traditionalist clerics fiercely opposed it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just quiet opposition. I was shocked reading this. Maulana Muhammad Ali Jihad, a huge political leader, threatened civil disobedience.
Yeah, they were marching on the British viceroy.
With babies. They literally brought infants in their arms to the viceroy to demand the legal right to marry them off.
It is a staggering historical image. They argued that their tradition didn't stipulate an age limit, so the state shouldn't either.
The irony is just suffocating. But what's amazing is how Parwez countered them. He didn't just say, hey, this is morally wrong. He dismantled their argument using their own text.
He used a specific Quranic principle called Tazrif Ayat.
Right, let's explain that. What does Tazrif Ayat actually mean?
It means cross-referencing verses. You don't look outside the text for answers. You look at how the Quran itself uses a specific word in different contexts.
The text explains the text.
Exactly. So Parwez looked at the word ashudahu maturity.
The word used for handling the orphan's finances.
Right. The financial verses say you cannot hand over property to a child until they reach ashudahu, meaning they have the intellectual and physical maturity to understand contracts and protect their interests.
Because a 7-year-old can't manage a bank account.
Obviously not. So Parwez took that standard and mapped it onto marriage.
Oh, that is brilliant logic.
He basically asked the clerics, if your own law states a child isn't intellectually mature enough to buy a piece of land,
how could that same child possibly have the maturity to enter into a lifelong, legally binding marriage contract?
Exactly. It's a massive contradiction. Entering marriage requires a shudahu. Parwez proved that by just cross-referencing the rules.
So handling property and handling your own bodily autonomy both require full intellectual maturity.
Yes. But the traditionalists had a counterargument.
Right, the historical traditions.
They cited widespread historical reports, hadith claiming that the Prophet himself married a 6-year-old.
Now, just to be super clear with our listeners, we are strictly maintaining impartiality here. We aren't endorsing a theological side. We are just relaying Parwez's analysis of this text in history.
Yes, exactly. We are exploring his framework.
Yeah.
And Parwez's response to those historical reports was to apply the rule of the fuad, the intellect.
Because you can't just blindly follow a historical report.
Yeah.
Really.
Right. The source material explicitly rejects those historical claims. Parwez argued that blind faith in unverified historical reports violates the very rule established in Section 1.
If a rumor contradicts the systemic law of the text, you throw out the rumor.
Exactly. Based on cross-referencing other historical timelines, Parwez argued she was likely 17 to 19 years old. But his main point was methodological. You cannot break the overarching systemic law just because everyone says so.
You cannot abandon your intellectual defense system.
You have to protect the vulnerable. You have to demand maturity.
So just thinking about this today, I mean, are public funds in our own countries protected with the same sacred duty as an orphan's inheritance?
I think we both know the answer to that.
Yeah, not even close. But let's move forward. If a society actually does reach maturity and they manage their assets well, they need a reliable system of exchange, right?
They do. They need a way to interact without exploiting each other.
Because interactions between mature individuals can devolve into chaos pretty quickly. So how does the framework address this?
This moves us into the second half of Ayat 34 and then Ayat 35. These verses issue two major commands.
What are they?
First, a command to fulfill covenants, and second, a command to use the straight balance al-qistas al-mustaqim when measuring.
Fulfilling covenants. That feels like, standard moral advice. Keep your promises.
It sounds simple, but Parwez emphasizes that this isn't just a nice suggestion. It is the absolute bedrock of society.
Because you will be questioned about them. The verse explicitly says that.
Yes. And the source notes something really profound here. In this framework, even God binds himself to his promises.
Wait, really? The Creator binds himself to a contract?
Yes. The text repeatedly states that God will not break his covenant and allows himself to be held accountable to those promises.
That is massive. If the ultimate authority is bound by the rules of the contract, then no human leader can claim to be above the law.
Exactly. It establishes an unbreakable rule of law. But to enforce that law, you need the second part, the straight balance.
Al-qistas al-mustaqim. Now, historically, this just meant literal weights in a market, right?
Right, like don't shave metal off the scale when you're selling wheat.
But Parwez scales this up conceptually.
He does. He calls it the engine of reason. It represents standardized weights, standardized measures, and ultimately standardized laws.
Standardized laws. Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I was thinking about this earlier. Imagine playing a board game like Monopoly or whatever, where the rules change depending on who is rolling the dice.
It would be absolute chaos.
It's unplayable. Standardized laws, the straight balance, mean everyone plays by the exact same rules.
And practically speaking, it is the ultimate transaction cost reducer.
Transaction costs. I like that economic angle.
If the scale is straight, you don't have to spend hours verifying every single trade. You just trust the system. It removes the friction from society.
And Parwez ties this to a specific Arabic phrase at the end of the verse, right? Asanu tawila.
Yes. Asanu tawila translates to the better end or the better result. And Parwez contrasts this with how modern clerics misuse the word tawil.
Misuse it how?
Well, a lot of clerics use tawil to mean hidden interpretation. They twist Quranic meanings to fit their own esoteric or political agendas.
They bend the rules of the board game.
Exactly. But Parwez argues that its actual linguistic meaning is the ultimate practical consequence, the physical reality it produces.
So standardized laws are the better end because they literally produce a better society.
Yes. They reduce friction, they reduce transaction costs, and they eliminate social conflict.
Because what happens when the balance fails? What happens when the ruler is bent?
You get a low-trust society. Everyone assumes they're being cheated at all times.
And a society without a straight balance collapses under the weight of its own paranoia. We see that happening in institutions all around us today.
Absolutely. The system fractures.
Okay, so we've talked about the individual mind, the vulnerable assets, and the rules of interaction. But when the loss of systemic trust happens, when the balance is broken, who is usually responsible?
It usually comes down to the people running the system.
Right. And what kind of behavior takes over? The text points directly to human ego.
It does. This brings us to Section 4, analyzing Ayat 37 and 38. And this is where Parwez introduces what he calls social physics.
Social physics. I am obsessed with this term. It sounds so clinical. What do the verses actually say?
They say, "And do not walk upon the earth exultantly. Indeed, you will never tear the earth apart, and you will never reach the mountains in height."
See, on the surface, that just sounds like toetic imagery. Don't walk too proudly.
But Parwez breaks down the physical reality of it, the physics of the metaphor.
Oh, so?
He points out that no matter how hard you stomp your feet in pride, you do not possess the kinetic energy to rend the earth asunder.
You literally can't break the ground with your ego.
Right. And no matter how tall you stretch your neck, you will never rival the mountains in height, is a physical impossibility.
It's a brutal reality check. The laws of nature remain completely indifferent to human hubris.
Exactly. It's a psychological critique of hollow pride. The source text highlights a very specific human sickness here.
What sickness?
Leaders and individuals who want to be praised for things they haven't actually done. They want the massive output of respect without the input of actual work.
They build a facade of competence. It's like someone demanding a gold medal for running a marathon they watched on TV.
That's a great way to put it.
They are projecting a reality that the physics of the universe just doesn't support. The scale doesn't balance. Input does not equal output.
Right. They're trying to cheat the straight balance with their arrogance.
Listeners, just look around at modern influencers or politicians or even corporate leaders. How much of our culture today is built on walking exultantly while contributing absolutely nothing of substance?
A huge amount of it. But the universe doesn't care about your ego. It cares about the straight balance.
The mountain does not care how important you think you are.
Exactly.
Okay, we have covered so much ground today. Let's do a quick recap of this entire intellectual defense system.
Let's do it.
Step 1. Filter the noise with your fuad, your critical intellect. Do not pursue things blindly.
Because you will be questioned.
Step 2. Fiercely protect the vulnerable assets of your community, like an orphan's property, until society reaches maturity.
Step 3. Demand a straight balance in all transactions. Fulfill your covenants to achieve the better end.
And step 4. Recognize the social physics of reality. Your ego cannot override the laws of nature.
It is a brilliant, interconnected system.
It really is. It moves from individual integrity to societal structure seamlessly.
Oh, Parwez has more to say on this.
Oh, definitely. Moving from individual integrity to the ultimate source of wisdom. In Lecture 8 of 17, which covers Ayat 39 through 41, we are going to explore the concept of hikmah.
Hikmah, meaning wisdom. Yes, the wisdom that underpins all of these laws we just discussed. And we'll explore why the Quran warns so sternly against creating other gods alongside the law of Allah.
Ah, so creating alternative systems of authority. That is going to be a heavy discussion.
It ties everything together.
I can't wait for that. But for now, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought.
Take it away.
Before you jump into your next meeting, or before you scroll through your next social media feed, ask yourself a serious question. Are you guarding your intellect like a vulnerable asset?
Are you using the firewall?
Right. Or are you just handing the keys over to the loudest voice in the room? Keep your filter on. Keep questioning. Keep diving deep.